What is the best magnesium to take that's not a pill? Almonds are a fantastic source of magnesium. I think a handful of almonds a day is great. Is your back pain totally gone? Yeah, it's pretty much gone. I mean, I still occasionally get achy, but it's like miraculously vanished. And I owe my back surgery for that. I had L5-S1 artificial disc replacement about 6.5 months ago, and it's been life-changing for me. Best supplements for men in their mid-50s. Good high-quality whey protein for somebody in their mid-50s, I think, is very smart. I think creatine makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of research now coming out on the value of creatine for skeletal muscle, for maintaining energy, and also for brain health. Ingredients to avoid and tips on nutrition when traveling. Generally, I always like to travel with snacks. I like to travel with easily accessible sources of high-quality protein, and I also really like to travel with whole fruit. What's the truth about saturated fat? Is it all created equal? The short answer is no, it's not all created equal. Saturated fatty acids are... All right. AMA number 2. You guys ready for this? I hope you are. I was very flattered at the positive feedback that we got on the first AMA. I mean, I guess I shouldn't be surprised. It was pretty bomb, I will admit. But, it was my first time doing it. So, but you guys liked it, and I got to give the people what they want. That's what I'm committed to. And that's what I'm here for. So this is AMA number 2. You guys, again, sent in some incredible questions on Insta, and so we're going to tackle a whole bunch of them. You sent in a lot more questions about supplementation, diet, lifestyle, some personal questions. So as usual, we're going to try to cover a mix of both. But again, just completely, I guess I shouldn't be impressed, but just love the thoughtfulness and the nuance with which you guys think. It's really wonderful. So I'm just so proud of the community that we've created over here at The Genius Life. Thank you guys for staying subscribed. And let's go through them. So the first question, Jackie P1208 asked, should I prioritize eating clean and organic or eating the right foods? I ask for my grocery bill. That's a great question. I think you should prioritize eating the right foods over eating quote unquote clean and organic. I always say, and this is something that I firmly believe, you want to major in the majors. And the most important thing today, generally from a health standpoint, obviously this is not personalized advice, but you want to hit energy balance. You want your foods to fill you up. You don't want to be hungry. You want to maintain a normal, healthy weight. You want your musculature to be healthy. And you want to make sure that you're eating nutrient-dense, a blend of nutrient-dense plant and animal foods. That is the base of the Genius Life food hierarchy, if you will. And so that would be my approach. Prioritize being able to buy high-quality proteins, meat, eggs, fish, poultry, whole plant foods, dark leafy greens, berries, things like that. I think those are the macros. You want to make sure that you're hitting your protein target. Well, even more importantly than that you're able to make protein a priority in your diet. Protein is a nutrient, so a food that's high in protein is going to be inherently nutrient dense for that reason. It's going to be inherently more satiating than low protein foods, because what do we say over and over again on this podcast? That protein is the most satiating macronutrient. The biggest ROI is going to be minimizing the consumption of ultra-processed foods and prioritizing protein-rich foods, and then fiber-rich foods. So dark leafy greens, berries, these are all foods that offer a lot of bang for the buck in terms of filling you up, helping you reach and not overshoot your energy budget, your calorie budget for the day, and doing it with the least amount of misery possible. That is priority. That should be priority number 1. Now, once you move up the rungs of our little hypothetical food pyramid here, and you're able to comfortably from the standpoint of budget, then you can start to prioritize eating clean, whatever that means for you, and organic. Eating organic is going to reduce your exposure to synthetic pesticides. Organic doesn't necessarily mean healthy. Obviously, there's a lot of unhealthy, ultra-processed, organic labeled junk foods in the modern supermarket. I mean, there's just no getting around that. So the organic label doesn't necessarily mean healthy. And organic isn't perfect. Organic is not a panacea. I have come across numerous studies that show that even organic foods sometimes have residues of synthetic pesticides in them. And that's because of, processing methods, the migration of pesticides via the industrial ag production process. So, it's not perfect, and organic isn't going to be more nutrient dense. Organic meat is not going to have more protein than conventionally produced meat. But you are reducing, you're not altogether eliminating, but you are reducing your exposure to synthetic herbicides and pesticides, which I think is important. But is it as important as energy balance, as hitting your protein target every day, getting fiber, getting plant nutrients like carotenoids and anthocyanins, which, we have tons of research on in terms of the benefits for brain health, for eye health, for skin health, for cardiovascular health? There's just no question. So you want to, first and foremost, eat the right foods, minimally processed whole foods mostly, and enjoy the occasional ultra-processed food indulgence if you choose to. You don't have to, but, you do want to live, right? You do want to make room for the fun foods. And once you've got that covered, those bases covered, then I think it's reasonable to move up the ladder to then start to look at, organic and whatnot. When it comes to clean foods, I mean, the whole concept of clean foods really only applies to ultra-processed foods. Like, which ultra-processed, how do we rank ultra-processed foods? Well, yeah, I think it's probably worth looking at, becoming familiar in nutritionese and habitually looking at the ingredients lists and making sure that there are no ingredients that are going to irritate you. I think it's smart if you're avoiding, for example, ultra-processed seed oils or gums and emulsifiers. I think it makes sense to glance at the ingredients list, but not to kid ourselves and mistake ultra-processed foods as dietary staples. They should never be. And then on top of that, there are really, because you asked for your grocery bill, Jackie P1208, there are ways to economize. So I think, buying frozen, this is something that I do all the time. I buy frozen broccoli. I buy frozen broccoli, which I love to throw into, like, if I'm making a stir fry, I'll buy riced frozen broccoli now, which I've talked about this a bit on Instagram, which is super fun. You just throw riced vegetables into your rice cooker with the dry rice, and it bulks up. Yours is my favorite food hack of late. I have a rice cooker, and I'll make rice for carbs, for gains, to supply energy for my workouts. But a serving of rice is like 45 grams of dry rice. It's like nothing, and it's like 160 calories. It's pure starch. I'm not saying there's anything, inherently wrong with rice, but to bulk it up, you can throw riced vegetables or even whole vegetables. I've done this too. You just throw it in the rice cooker with your rice. You don't have to add any additional water. You just throw it in and you set your rice cooker. No additional work. You set your rice cooker, you put it on, and you get this incredible added bulk to your rice. It's completely unmistakable too as vegetables because it's so well cooked. Over the course of cooking the rice, the vegetables totally soften. You can't even tell that they're vegetables. And you're adding all of these health benefits. You're adding fiber, you're adding phytonutrients to the rice. It's just a super easy and visible way to get added veggies into your diet. So that's something I love to do. And I use frozen vegetables for that. I also think it's cool to buy frozen berries and whatnot. You can buy meat in bulk. You can buy cheaper cuts of meat. You can meal prep. When buying fresh produce, you can buy in season. It tends to be cheaper when you're buying in season. And if you can't afford organic, just make sure that you're rinsing. You should be rinsing organic produce too, but just make sure that you're rinsing your produce well. And they do make vegetable washes if you want to be extra safe. It's not a fail safe. There is the potential of pesticides to, permeate into the flesh of the fruit. But I think some of these commercial vegetable washes can be reasonably effective. They're usually made with baking soda, salt, vinegar, and those have all been shown, I believe, in studies to help to reduce the residues of pesticides. So, trying to think of any other cost-saving hacks. Yeah, buying in bulk. It's all great. And not letting perfect be the enemy of the good. Again, majoring in the majors. That was a great question. Yemmers, Yemmerz, asks, can you discuss nicotine pouches? Any positive or negative effects? I feel like this is under discussed. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are doing them, so worth talking about. And I myself, I enjoy the occasional nicotine pouch as a nootropic or as a cognitive boosting tool. Now, nicotine, despite what you've heard on other podcasts, nicotine is not a free lunch. There are harms associated with just nicotine. Most of the harms that have been elucidated in the literature from nicotine have tended to come from studies using combustible tobacco, which obviously contains a high amount of nicotine. And we know that smoking is not good for you. It's associated with obviously sharply increased risk of lung cancer, of cardiovascular disease, of Alzheimer's disease. You don't smoke. But nicotine pouches have arisen as a viable tobacco cessation alternative, which they're now, in fact, FDA approved for that purpose. And nicotine does have some really interesting research on it. It does seem to play a role in, it can potentially boost cognitive function. There are some studies on the major metabolite of nicotine, which is called cotinine, as being able to potentially boost mental health in certain regards. They're primarily animal studies, so I wouldn't put too much stock in that research. And again, with nicotine pouches, you're getting a dose of nicotine without the ingestion of tar and smoke, which is of benefit. So you get a potential cognitive boost. Nicotine is also an appetite suppressant, so that might, there might be some benefits there, although I'm not suggesting you use nicotine as an appetite suppressant, but it does happen to do that. But there are significant downsides. So nicotine is well known by itself. I'm not just talking about cigarette smoke. I'm talking about nicotine in the lip pouches is known to increase heart rate acutely. It's known to increase blood pressure, and it's highly addictive. So if you are unable to have a responsible relationship with nicotine, which most people are not, it's highly addictive. Then what you're doing is you're artificially causing an increase in your heart rate, in your blood pressure. Now the question is, are the increases in heart rate and blood pressure sustained for somebody who develops a tolerance to nicotine? I think that's unclear. What we do know is that for somebody who's naive to nicotine, it definitely increases heart rate and blood pressure. It also induces vasoconstriction. So anybody who's getting a surgery, you want to steer clear of nicotine because it can impede wound healing. And it's pretty obviously apparent that it can affect cardiovascular health because of its vasoconstrictive effect. So anybody, I've experienced this myself on days where I've used more than I would like. I feel slightly more out of breath, and I don't use combustible nicotine. Nicotine in and of itself does have that vasoconstrictive effect, which can affect cardiorespiratory fitness negatively. So it's not a free lunch. I think if you can responsibly use it the same way that, we can responsibly use caffeine, and we know not to consume caffeine too late at night otherwise it might negatively impact sleep. I think if you are able to have a responsible relationship with it, and use it for a cognitive boost, then that might potentially work. But I want to caveat that with the warning that not everybody is able to do that because nicotine is addictive, regardless of the source. So just be careful with it. It is not harmless, but it's much lower risk than smoking. And I should also add that if you are a nicotine user, if you're not a nicotine user, I'm not recommending that you start. If you are a nicotine user, there are some clean products on the market that I'm familiar with. I have zero financial affiliation with any of these products, but and I just go by what they've told me about the products and what I understand from their websites and their marketing and having personal relationships with the founders, or maybe not personal relationships, but I've interacted with the founders of these companies. There's a company called Athletic Nicotine, and there's a company called Knick-Knack, and both make what I understand to be among the cleanest products on the market. There might be others, but the only two that I'm familiar with are Athletic Nicotine and Knick-Knack, and both make products that are very low dose. So when I personally will use nicotine for a cognitive boost, Athletic Nicotine makes a 1.5 milligram lip pouch, and then Knick-Knacks are lozenges that you can easily break and dose accordingly. But I'm not recommending that you go out and try this. I'm not recommending that if you don't use nicotine that you go out and start. But for those who do, those are, I think, better options that are out there. All right. Jenny LDSLP asks, best supplements for men in their mid-50s. Well, that's another good question. I don't necessarily know that supplementation needs to be all that different across the lifespan. I think, there truly is no one size fits all method of supplementation. I think you really owe it to yourself to do blood work and to see what micronutrients you may be deficient in or inadequate in. A dietary assessment might be worthwhile. But in general, I think as you get older, there is certainly going to be value in a high quality protein powder like whey protein. We've talked a little bit about the concept of anabolic resistance, that as you age, your cells become less sensitive to leucine, and so the leucine threshold that's normally required. Leucine is one of the essential amino acids. It's the amino acid that basically flips the switch to activate muscle protein synthesis, which is the growth and maintenance of skeletal muscle. You need to get generally about 2.5 grams of leucine per protein bolus to flip that switch. Otherwise, the protein is just being used to maintain the body. But once you hit that 2.5 gram dose of leucine in a protein meal or with a protein shake, then your body's like, hey, we actually got enough protein going around in the system to actually build muscle, which is actually not all that essential from a survival standpoint. So that's why we always generally want to hit 2.5 grams of leucine per meal. But where the notion of anabolic resistance comes into play is that it's thought that older adults are less sensitive to leucine and therefore need more of it. And leucine tends to be enriched in high quality proteins. So that's animal source proteins, just to translate that for y'all. And it can be hard to do. It can be hard to hit that your protein target every day. And that's where I think the value of protein powders comes in, and I think it makes a lot of sense for that purpose. So, good high quality whey protein for somebody in their mid 50s, I think is very smart. I think creatine makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of research now coming out on the value of creatine for skeletal muscle, for maintaining energy intramuscularly, and also for brain health. We need a lot more research in the brain health creatine space, but needless to say, there is some really compelling data showing that for people who are sleep deprived, for people who are even experiencing cognitive decline, that creatine might play a supportive role. It seems to be really beneficial, especially when the body is undergoing stress. And aging is kind of a stressor on the body. So to me, it makes logical sense that for both men and women, that creatine is going to be valuable, as we age. So I think creatine makes a lot of sense. I think Vitamin D synthesis as we get older, if I recall correctly, vitamin D is something that becomes increasingly important as we get older. And vitamin D is a steroid in the body. It's not just a vitamin, it's a steroid that regulates the expression of nearly 5% of the human genome. That's a lot for one vitamin. That's a lot of weight to carry, a lot of weight on the shoulders of vitamin D. And that's why we want to make sure that we are sufficient in vitamin D. I wouldn't just blanket recommend vitamin D. I think it's worth getting your levels tested. So you want to generally supplement with vitamin D3, which is the animal-based form. It's the same form of vitamin D that you find in eggs, that you find in fish. So I think that is potentially really useful. For men specifically, but also for women, I think there's a lot of value in astaxanthin. We need more human data on this, but as you guys know, I'm a huge fan of astaxanthin. And astaxanthin is actually one of the few supplements that was tested in the NIH's, they have a program, I think it's called the Interventions Testing Program. I could be wrong on that. But astaxanthin is one of the few supplements that has actually shown a significant boost in lifespan in mammals in the NIH's own longevity nutrient testing program. I did a podcast in the past with one of the founders of a company that I work with called AX3, and we talked all about this. But needless to say, the improvement in lifespan in mice that was seen in this NIH program was actually only seen in male mice. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't think it's probably also very valuable for women. I think it's valuable for both. But, women tend to live longer than men, and so we don't yet fully understand why that is. There might be there might be myriad reasons for that. But for a man in their 50s, I think astaxanthin makes a lot of sense. I personally take astaxanthin. I take about 24 milligrams a day of astaxanthin. So I think that there's probably a lot of value there. Magnesium, omega-3s. Omega-3s I think are great, especially as you get older. They help to modulate the body's inflammation response. Most people don't consume adequate omega-3s, so I'm a huge fan of omega-3s. We have a relationship here on this podcast with Peori. We're huge fans of Peori fish oil. There are many, I guess many is maybe an overstatement. There are a lot of good high-quality fish oil producers out there. I happen to love Peori. I take it every day. One of the things that you want to look out for in a fish oil is that there are two things. First, you want to ensure that your fish oil is triglyceride, that your omega-3s, three things. You want to make sure that your fish oil clearly indicates the amount of DHA and EPA that's in it, that's in a dose. I've seen fish oils, generally they're the cheaper forms, the cheaper fish oils that you buy at like a CVS that just tell you how much fish oil you're getting. But it says the ingredients panel says the supplement facts panel says nothing about the actual milligram dosage of eicosapentaenoic pentaenoic acid or EPA and docosahexaenoic acid or DHA. And that is a huge red flag. So you want to make sure that the fish oil that you're taking clearly indicates the amount of EPA and DHA that's in a serving. And you want that to make up a high proportion of the actual fat that's in the supplement, because if it's a low dose, you then have to ask yourself, like, what else am I ingesting with this supplement if we're getting such a low dose of EPA and DHA? And I try to take about 1 to 2 grams of combined EPA and DHA every day. The second thing that you want to look out for in a fish oil is you want to make sure that it's in its triglyceride form, which is going to be the most bioavailable. Now, this is kind of tricky because there are other fish oil formulations on the market that are in ethyl ester form, which is not as bioavailable. However, they tend to be higher potency. So they tend to have a lot higher levels in terms of the levels of the quantity of EPA and DHA in the serving, but they're not as bioavailable. Whereas the triglyceride form is exactly what you're getting in fish. So you want to make sure that your fish oils in its triglyceride form. And then the third thing I would say is helpful to look out for is you want to make sure that the fish oil is IFO certified, which is a third-party testing organization that tests for the purity and the potency of your fish oils, which is important because fish oils are omega-3 fatty acids, and omega-3 fatty acids are very prone to the process known as oxidation, which is a form of chemical rot. And you want to make sure that your fish oils are IFO certified. Now, again, we work with Peori. There are other brands on the market that are great, but I happen to love Peori because it ticks all of those boxes. And so for me, it's just set it and forget it. I take Peori, and I've had the founder, Oliver, on the podcast. He just, he's so passionate about the supplement industry and specifically transparency within the supplement industry. So it's a great product to look out for. So I recommend them. Hope that answers that. Haley Valine asks, what's the truth about saturated fat? Is it all created equal? That is another good question. So it's a question that requires a nuanced answer. But the short answer is no, it's not all created equal. So saturated fatty acids are a category of chemically stable fats that tend to be stable solid at room temperature. And among that category, there are different types of saturated fatty acids, and they're not all created equal. So, for example, one of the primary saturated fats in dark chocolate, as well as in beef, is called stearic acid, which is neutral from a cardiovascular standpoint, from a lipid standpoint. There's actually some evidence suggesting that stearic acid might play a role in mitochondrial health. So saturated stearic acid might actually be quite healthful. And we're told again and again that saturated fat is bad, right? Universally bad. Well, that is nonsense. That is not true. Saturated fat is an entire category of fats, and that conversation deserves nuance. Even among dairy fats, dairy is really interesting because dairy proportionally has a higher percentage of saturated fat compared to any other food. Dairy is mostly saturated fat, but because the saturated fat in full-fat dairy is bound up in what's called milk-fat globule membrane, it seems to have a neutral impact on cardiovascular health, which explains the paradoxical finding that people who consume full-fat dairy as opposed to reduced fat or non-fat dairy have better cardiometabolic health. Why might that be if they're consuming all of this saturated fat, right? Well, it's because of the makeup of the saturated fat. It's not just that saturated fat is, this dietary villain. It's that they're all sort of different, and that's why the food matrix is so important, eating primarily whole foods. So what I've said again and again, I wrote this in Genius Foods, and I think we talked about this a bit on the last AMA, is that when saturated fat is found in whole foods, it's not something that I worry about. Where I think it's worth paying attention to, particularly if you have a history of hypercholesterolemia, especially if you have familial hypercholesterolemia, you want to be really mindful of the added saturated fats. Now, where do those tend to come from? They tend to come from fat extracts like butter, like coconut oil, like beef tallow, which is now all the rage. They tend to be packaged in ultra-processed foods. And those are the foods, by and large, that I think you ought to pay attention to if reducing the saturated fat in your diet is something that you aspire to. The American Heart Association recommends no more than 10% of your calories every day coming from saturated fat. And I actually think that that's a reasonable recommendation. If you're eating primarily lean meats, it's a reasonable recommendation, but it's a recommendation that, again, deserves nuance. So again, it's like, where are those saturated fats coming from? But all that being said, by sticking to a minimally processed whole foods diet, and by eating lean meat, properly raised meat, which is going to be inherently leaner than factory farmed meat, for example, I think that's going to be a fairly easy target to hit. Do I eat butter? Yes, on occasion. I consider it an indulgence. I don't necessarily consider it a health food. I consider most added fats to be indulgent. Even extra virgin olive oil is something that I think is definitely worth incorporating into your diet. There's a ton of research on the health benefits of extra virgin olive oil, but it's an added fat. It's not nutrient dense. It's highly calorie dense. So you just want to be careful with the added fats. All that being said, fat is healthy. You need fat. You need fat for hormone synthesis. People ask this actually about when we were talking about fat and fat loss on the previous AMA. People raised the important question of, well, what about, we can't just all be eating low-fat diets. Well, that's not what I was recommending. Fat in whole foods, I think, is great. You need fat. You need fat for the digestion and absorption and assimilation of fat-soluble nutrients. You need fat for satiety. You need fat for hormone synthesis for both men and for women. So the goal is not a low-fat diet, but it's added fats that are, there's no biological necessity for added fats. So you just want to be careful be mindful of where those fats are coming from. All right, moving on. Watercress 33. I love these questions, are so good. A little disappointed. We didn't get any questions about Delilah this time around. My cat. I don't know. How is she?
How's Delilah?
Yeah, give a shout out to Delilah's great. Delilah's great. I love that little cat. She's the best.
I think everyone knows that.
Everybody should know that. I love her. Okay? As much as a person could love a cat. It's like my little fur daughter. All right, moving on. Watercress 331. What is the best magnesium to take that's not a pill? Well, what's wrong with taking magnesium in a pill? I take magnesium every day. That is one of my staple supplements. I find that it helps with, I don't get chronic migraines, but I do get them occasionally. And I find that when I'm more diligent about my magnesium intake, I feel like I have less of them. Also, there's really good data on magnesium in mental health, magnesium in sleep. Magnesium is one of these micronutrients that most people tend to underconsume, and yet it's involved in hundreds of enzymatic processes in the body. So it's crucially important. It's actually really important from the standpoint, I think, of longevity, because it's instrumental in DNA repair enzymes in our bodies that require magnesium to function properly. Magnesium is also really important for ATP synthesis. So there is a lot of merit to supplementing with magnesium, and the scientific data on it seems to come out, fairly regularly. Just supporting that magnesium is something worth taking, or at the very least prioritizing in your diet. But when it comes to the forms of magnesium, I'm a big fan of magnesium glycinate or magnesium bisglycinate, which is basically magnesium bound to the amino acid glycine, which is also, I think, very beneficial. So you're not really getting a lot of glycine when you take magnesium glycinate, but it is, I guess, worth noting that you are getting a little bit of glycine when you take magnesium glycinate. It's also very well tolerated from a GI standpoint. There are other forms of magnesium, like magnesium citrate, which are sometimes prescribed for digestive motility and can serve as a laxative. So if you take a lot of magnesium citrate, it might make you run to the bathroom. Magnesium glycinate doesn't tend to have that impact, doesn't tend to have that effect. There's also magnesium threonate, which is thought to be the most bioavailable form of magnesium for the brain. And there was recently a study that came out that found that magnesium threonate, 1,000 milligrams taken before bed, actually boosted some markers of sleep quality. So there are many different types of magnesium that one can take. We have a relationship here on this podcast with Bioptimizers, and they make a magnesium supplement that I tend to take, and it has 7 supplemental forms of magnesium in it. So it's got all 7 and not too much of any one particular form. So you're not going to, it doesn't tend to lead to digestive, discomfort or urgency or anything like that. But that is a pill. So when it comes to magnesium, that's not a pill. Well, there is a product that's been out on the market for, decades at this point called Calm. No relationship with Calm Magnesium, but it is a drink mix that you can mix into water and stuff. I also think actually, now that I think about it, Bioptimizers also now has a drinkable magnesium form. And I think I've tried it and it tastes really good. So you can, check out Bioptimizers. They have that as well. There are different magnesium bath salts and stuff. I'm not fluent in the the pharmacokinetics of topical magnesium or anything like that in terms of how it actually gets into the system. I'm not really aware of that. I certainly wouldn't rely on that as a way of hitting your magnesium target for the day. But yeah, there are plenty of drink mixes on the market now that include magnesium. But I just take a pill or 2, and it works for me. You can also get it from food. Almonds are a fantastic source of magnesium. I think a handful of almonds a day is great. You're getting vitamin E. You're getting about 25% of your, 25% of your daily intake, your RDI for magnesium in a handful of almonds. Dark chocolate is another great source. And dark leafy greens. Anything green is going to be a good source of magnesium. It's actually really interesting that when you can Google this. If you compare the hemoglobin molecule, which is obviously in our blood, what charts, oxygen around, and you compare that to chlorophyll, vastly different, chemicals, right? You would think. But if you actually look at the molecules of each, they're remarkably similar, with the key difference being that at the center of the chlorophyll molecule, there's a little iron molecule, and then at the center of the chlorophyll, at the center of hemoglobin, you find iron. At the center of chlorophyll, you find magnesium. So chlorophyll is green. Anything green, typically in the produce section of the supermarket, is going to be a decent source of magnesium. So that's another reason why I think dark leafy greens are great. Almonds are great. You'll find all of them on the cover of Genius Foods, and yeah, you can also eat your magnesium. You don't necessarily need to supplement with it, although it can be hard to get on a day in, day out basis from food. All right. Hot House Flower 108. Okay, this is, I guess, a somewhat more personal question. It's a weird question, but I'll try to answer it in a non-weird way. Hot House Flower 108. What do you desire most right now? Man, I don't know. What do I desire? I guess there's a few things. Well, one, I'm trying to find a balance between my family, as I mentioned on the last AMA, moved to Vegas, and I'm very close with my family, and I find it to be frustrating sometimes that I don't want to live in Vegas personally. No shade to Vegas. I like being in Vegas a lot, but I don't like being so far. I'm not even really that far. I live in Los Angeles, but I wish that we could find a way to make it work where we all are in the same city again. Because they recently moved, like about a year and a half ago. And that to me is very frustrating. I don't like being away from my family. So I go to Vegas a lot, and that's nice. But we're a super small, close, tight-knit family. And, I guess I desire more family time. I also think, something else I desire, there's a lot of polarity right now, like in the media, on social media. And I don't love that. I wish we could all just get along. And I don't really see how that's going to be possible, what with the algorithms of social media and the increasing politicization of pretty much everything, which maybe I play a role in contributing to. I don't know, because I do like to troll sometimes on social media, as you know if you watch my stories. But I do wish that I do hope that at some point we'll be able to collectively turn the temperature down a bit, and get back to some shared common sense of humanity, That would be great. All right, Christina Lamond. Protein powder recommendations, please. Well, that's a great question. You guys know I'm a big fan of whey protein. I think whey protein is great. It's the highest biological value of any protein powder that I'm aware of. It's very high as a proportion of amino acids in leucine, and it's got a very balanced amino acid profile beyond leucine, because leucine is the necessary but not sufficient amino acid with regards to triggering and sustaining muscle protein synthesis. So you need leucine, but leucine alone is not enough to build muscle. But whey protein is great because it contains a high amount of leucine and it contains a bevy of other wonderful amino acids. So, I'm a huge fan of whey protein. A lot of people will claim that they have digestive issues with whey protein. And to those people, I say, well, you've got some options with whey. You've got whey protein concentrate and you've got whey protein isolate. For people who tend to have digestive issues with whey protein, I would say err on the side of whey protein isolate, which is just a much cleaner form of whey protein, meaning it's got fewer fat and carbohydrate residues. It's just a lot more stringently filtered. So what you're getting with whey protein isolate is just a much more pure protein product. It's also going to be, whey is free of casein. So in dairy protein is comprised of two protein types. You've got your casein and your whey. There is some thinking based on emerging science that many people don't digest A1 casein as well as they do A2, which is thought to be the ancestral form of the casein protein. I'm not super well versed in this science just yet. I would love to have an expert on the podcast to school me in that regard. But the thinking is that at some point along the trajectory of the modern cow, the ancestral A protein was somehow converted to or mutated or whatever to A1. And that's led to some of the digestive issues that many people claim to have when digesting commercially available dairy protein. There are now even some products on the market that are made using A2 dairy. There's a company called Pioneer Pastures, which I invested in actually recently because of their desire, their passion for educating around the differences between A1 and A2. So Pioneer Pastures makes a great A2 alternative. But all that is to say that whey protein is free of casein. So for people who have any issues digesting casein, whey protein doesn't have any of that. The other thing that whey protein isolate has over whey protein concentrate is that whey protein concentrate is going to contain trace lactose. So if you're lactose intolerant, whey protein isolate is virtually a carbohydrate-free, lactose-free form of whey that should be very well tolerated. So when people say that they have sensitivity to whey protein isolate, I can't help but raise an eyebrow to that because there's virtually nothing in it of dairy origin that is known to be problematic to people. So for people who still claim that they don't easily digest whey protein isolate, then my suspicion is, okay, well, what's actually in the whey protein formulation that you're consuming? Is it perhaps an additive or an emulsifier that's causing you, digestive upset? I would then look to try different brands, different whey protein isolate brands. We work with two companies that produce great whey proteins. I've mentioned this. I mentioned this in the prior AMA, but Kion makes a whey protein isolate, as does I believe Momentus's whey protein is whey protein isolate. I'm not 100% sure on that actually, but both are great. Kion, I know for a fact, is whey protein isolate, and they use minimal ingredients other than the protein itself. So I would give either of those two brands a try. Now, grass-fed is sometimes lauded in terms of protein powders like whey protein, grass-fed whey protein isolate. That's not something that I actually look out for. I think that I don't think you should be overspending on a whey protein powder that's grass fed unless you can easily afford it, and you care about, the way that the cows are raised. Like I think that there's merit to that from a sourcing standpoint, but in terms of its nutritional value, what a cow eats dictates primarily the fatty acid, the makeup of its fat, the nutrients that are contained in its fat, its fatty acid profile, and the like. So not as essential for whey protein, and especially not as important for whey protein isolate, which has all of the fat and carbohydrates excluded. Now, for people who just don't want to do dairy, then I would say plant protein, like a blend of pea and rice, can sometimes hit that same, because protein formulators know that plant protein is not as high in leucine, so they'll use some combination of pea and rice to hit whatever the desired leucine target is, which hopefully you're dealing with a manufacturer that is aware of the 2.5 gram leucine threshold that we talked about earlier. But I'm not really a fan of plant-based protein powders because they tend to be hyper processed. Many of them do contain heavy metals, the dose of which, varies product to product, but it's just not something that if I'm consuming every day, it's not something that I necessarily want to expose myself to. When it comes to flavors, my personal preferences are either vanilla or unflavored. There was a study that came out, I forget if it was either Consumer Labs or the Clean Label Project, but they found that chocolate flavored protein powders did tend to contain lead, which makes sense because cheap cocoa sourcing, you don't know where the cacao is coming from, and cacao can harbor lead. So I tend to reach for, by default, an unsweetened or an unflavored whey protein, or vanilla. Those are my sort of go-to. I wouldn't necessarily go for beef protein. I know that that's now on the market, heavily marketed, but to me it's unclear what proportion of that protein is just beef skeletal muscle, dehydrated skeletal muscle versus collagen. And when I'm supplementing with a protein powder for the intent of supporting muscle protein synthesis, I want to know that the protein that I'm ingesting is high quality and is not collagen unless I choose to supplement with collagen. So I think that there should be a separation. And I just find that the beef protein powders that I've seen tend to not disclose the amino acid profile. And to me, that is a red flag. If I'm supplementing with protein powder, I want to know what I'm supplementing with. I either want to supplement with a high quality leucine-rich protein powder, or I want to supplement with collagen. I don't want to supplement with something that's trying to do both and is not being clear about which sort of side of that aisle it's situated on, if that makes sense. So I would generally avoid beef protein powder for that reason. All right. So many good questions. Okay, let's just, this one I'm going to try to make short. KHFBNB asked, thoughts on BPC 157, side effects, dosage, who should take it? So BPC 157 is a peptide. It's a gastric peptide. It's something that we naturally, I think, or we do produce it. It's a natural component of gastric juice that's now being synthesized in a lab. And it's all the rage among peptide enthusiasts for its ability to help accelerate healing, recovery, and in fact, it's even referred to in some parts as the Wolverine peptide for that reason, for its purported ability to facilitate wound healing. There's virtually no human clinical data on it. There's a fair amount of animal data and lots of anecdotes. So it's not something that I would recommend, but I will say that I've personally taken it. I took it after my back surgery, and I had no adverse effects from it. So I was injecting myself with it. It seemed safe in terms of, my using of it, which I did for 1 to 2 months. And, but I can't tell you whether or not it helped accelerate my healing. I did heal really well, but I was also taking other things to facilitate my healing. I was taking lots of collagen, lots of vitamin C, lots of micronutrients, bone broth and stuff like that, protein. Now, the way that it's purported to work, again, with virtually no human clinical data, so you just want to be careful, is it is thought to promote angiogenesis, which is the growth of new blood vessels, which can, obviously blood brings along with it healing factors and nutrients and stuff like that. So it promotes the growth of new blood vessels, capillaries, microvasculature, et cetera, which obviously, theoretically, you can imagine how that might support healing. And it's also thought to, I believe, sensitize your cells to growth hormone, which is also it's a healing hormone. It's expressed primarily when we go to sleep. It's one of the hormones involved in the rejuvenating aspects of sleep. Now, this could also be potentially dangerous, right, in the setting of cancer. So if you're at high risk for cancer, tumors and stuff like that, something to just be mindful of. So I'm not recommending that anybody go out and try BPC 157. There's, again, anybody who's trying to sell you on this stuff needs to disclose that there's not a lot of human data, but there are lots of anecdotes of people who claim that it has helped. So I will tell you that I've taken it because I was compelled by some of those anecdotes and some of the mechanisms that it's known to possess, right? But I can't tell you with any certainty whether or not it helped, right? I did heal really well from my surgery. I will say that my healing felt like it was really fast given what I went through, back surgery of my lumbar spine, as you guys know. But yeah, at this point, I would say it's more of an experiment. It's not evidence-based, but many experts, people, who are experts in medicine, what have you, seem to be a fan. And I think, more research is needed. So I hope we get to see that. Okay, moving on. So Tiffany.Tiffytune asked ingredients to avoid and tips on nutrition when traveling. Okay, let's tackle the first one. Ingredients to avoid. Well, I don't think that there's any ingredient that is needs to be avoided at all costs. I think this is going to be highly personal. And the dose is going to make the poison with pretty much everything. Obviously, if you have a sensitivity to a certain ingredient, you're going to want to avoid that, right? But what I tend to avoid primarily, big no-nos for me are trans fats, which are not actually super common these days, thankfully, because the FDA banned their most common form, which were in partially hydrogenated oils, which are no longer really on the market. So that's not really much of an issue anymore. I also tend to avoid lots of added sugar, and I also tend to avoid excessive ultra-processed seed oils. That's something that I generally will try to avoid, with the asterisk, the very important asterisk, being that a little bit of any of this stuff won't kill you. So I want you guys to think big picture. I know there are a lot of influencers right now on social media that will, every day they're picking off a new ingredient to fearmonger. And I think it's really important not to fear food, not to live in fear, not to stress yourself out about this stuff. And to just, again, when in doubt, make sure that the bulk of your diet is comprised primarily of minimally processed whole foods. It's the ultra-processed foods primarily that we want to minimize in our diet. And also to know that even in the bucket of ultra-processed foods, some are likely better than others. I eat ultra-processed Quest protein chips, most nights before bed while I'm watching Netflix, because it's a way to, just jack up my protein a little further. And so those are ultra-processed foods. There's no doubt about that. And I think that some of them even contain a gram or two of vegetable oil, but it's such a small dose that it's not something that I really even think about, because the rest of my diet is devoid of vegetable oils. So you got to think in terms of dose. Dose makes the poison with most things. Maybe not all things, but generally dose is going to make the poison. And so, there's no ingredient that's, I think, inherently evil other than artificially produced trans fats. And so you just want to be kind of, mindful of that, I suppose. And then Tiffany also asked another question, tips on nutrition when traveling. That's a great question. I've got actually a bunch of travel coming up. And so it's something that I'm going to be thinking more about. But generally, I always like to travel with snacks. Like if you were to open up my backpack whenever I'm on the road, it's packed with snacks, whether we're talking Built Puffs, protein bars, no affiliation, or beef jerky. I like to travel with easily accessible sources of high quality protein. I think that's important because sometimes hitting your protein target when on the road can be difficult. And I also really like to travel with whole fruit. It's satiating. It's going to scratch that itch. If I feel like I've got a craving for something sweet, having a Honeycrisp apple in my backpack, always appreciated. I love that. And then when it comes to finding food, once you're situated, but out of your home, I love to I prioritize places where I know that I can get grilled meat, like steak, like, lean cuts of meat, like New York strip steaks or, tenderloin, like fillets, like Outback Steakhouse. I mean, you could pretty much find an Outback in every major city, even non-major cities, and like really easy place to go and get healthy food. I generally will, I'll get a grilled meat of some sort. It is usually going to be red meat. And then I try to, in terms of vegetables, what do I do? The vegetables actually, ironically, everybody's always like, eat more fruits and vegetables. But when you're out on the road, eating vegetables can be a major Trojan horse for, lots of added fat calories. Because in restaurants, vegetables are usually doused in oil. And that can be really tricky. So sometimes I'll get I'll order salads and I'll just ask for some like vinegar on the side, like not vinaigrette. I'll skip the house salad dressing often, but not always. I'll skip the house dressing and I'll just ask for some like balsamic vinegar on the side. And I'll just, use that with some salt and pepper on my salad. And then I'll just know that, I'm getting plenty of fat from the steak that I'm having. So I don't need additional fat calories in the salad. And that's a really easy way to just sort of economize where calories are concerned. I also will occasionally travel with protein shakes. There's a company, I have no affiliation with Ascent, but they if you find a Whole Foods, sometimes I'll just go to Whole Foods and I'll buy these like Ascent protein powder packets that are single serve, and I'll just mix one of those up in my hotel room if I've got a craving. But yeah, it's generally for me not that hard. I've got it down to a science. When I travel, super easy to accommodate. All right, Chris Rellas asked, "Is your back pain totally gone?" Yeah, it's pretty much gone. I still occasionally get achy, but it's miraculously vanished compared to what it was. And I owe my back surgery for that. I had L5S1 artificial disc replacement about 6.5 months ago, if not more at this point. Yeah, about 6.5 months ago. And it's been life-changing for me. So I've done an interview with Dr. Jared Ament, who is my surgeon, on the show. You can find the episode that I did with him. It's a masterclass in terms of the procedure. Not wishing surgery on anybody. It should certainly be a last-line resort. But for me, I was at that point. I'd tried everything else, and I was becoming increasingly debilitated by my, low back pain. And so I made the decision to get my disc replaced, and it's been life-changing. I pray that it maintains, because it's been just so wonderful. I feel like I have a normal healthy spine again, which is great. So yeah, highly recommend, if you are down to the wire like I was, look into artificial disc replacement as an option. I know most doctors will try to sell fusion, but I don't think fusion is natural. Obviously, there are going to be certain instances where that is the optimal course of action to take, but If you're a candidate for artificial disc replacement, I think it's definitely something worth looking into. It's been very commonly used at the cervical level because it's just a lot. The head weighs a lot less than the rest of the body, and so at that level, they've had artificial discs on the market for a long time. Lumbar artificial disc replacement is a bit on the newer side, but it still has decades of use and decades worth of, decades of FDA approval in terms of in this country, the artificial disc that's used. And the one that I got, I think it's the only one that's currently approved in the United States, is the ProDisc L. And so, yeah, look into that if that's something that you're struggling with. I was struggling with it for a while, and it's changed my life. So 0 regrets. And then finally, a question on creatine. Megan MF15 asks, does creatine live up to the hype? Well, I'm going to say that, yeah, creatine lives up. Well, I retract that enthusiastic yeah with a yes and no. So I'm going to say that creatine definitely lives up to the hype in the sense that it is one of the very few, and we can count on one hand the number of supplements with the safety record and the efficacy record that creatine has. It goes back decades at this point. I mean, more than 20 years ago, I wrote my high school senior thesis on creatine monohydrate. So that's how long creatine monohydrate has been on the market, how long it's been studied and used by athletes. And it's now also being studied in the setting of brain health, which I alluded to earlier. And so that's super exciting. Now, where it is, I think, overhyped is that taking it is not going to make you, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Adding creatine to your supplement regimen is not going to make you Chris Bumstead. It is going to give you a, 5% boost, 10% boost in the gym. It's the sleep. It's the hitting your protein target. It's your diet quality. It's consistent strength training that are going to be the big needle movers in terms of your health. If you're a woman, it's not going to make you G.I. Jane, okay? But it is an adjunct, and it does lead to a boost in specific contexts. So high-intensity interval training, for example, intense anaerobic exercise, creatine does lead to a small boost. And so for that reason, I think it's definitely worth. It's almost a no-brainer if you're healthy, if you have healthy kidneys, if you're looking for an edge, creatine it's a no-brainer. There's also a lot of highly marketed supplements on the market that have way less evidence in support of. So, I mean, creatine should be your go-to if you're looking for a way to augment your training. From a brain health standpoint, we do need a lot more research in that regard. We need to know what daily dose is important from a, cognitive supporting standpoint. There are various disease states where creatine is now being actively investigated, like in the setting of mental health, in the setting of traumatic brain injury, in the setting of Alzheimer's disease. We don't have a dose that is settled upon the way that we do for sports performance, which is about 3 to 5 grams a day. So yeah, I would definitely consider creatine. I take it every day. We work with Momentous. We work with Kion. In terms of sports supplements, you don't really get better than Momentous or Kion. So, they both make a great CreaPure creatine product. And I would highly recommend looking into that. So again, it's not an anabolic steroid. It's not going to make you Chris Bumstead or G.I. Jane, but it is worth integrating into your supplement regimen if you take your training seriously. And from a cognitive health standpoint, it may play a supportive role there as well. I know that there's mounting data on this. So in terms of future-proofing your supplement regimen, assuming you're healthy, assuming you don't have any contraindications, I think it's definitely worth integrating. It's also super cheap. So, again, kind of a no-brainer. So thank you guys for all these incredible questions. I feel like I end up losing my voice by the end of these AMAs, but I have so much fun answering them. So thank you for continually, the thought that you guys put into them, for staying subscribed to the show, for continuing to evangelize the show. It means a lot when you guys spread the word, within your communities, to your friends, to your loved ones about the show. It's, as you guys know, it's my goal to create the best health and wellness content around. So the fact that you guys continually will tune in and that you're continually spreading the word about it, it just means the world to me. So thank you guys as always. And we're going to do more of these. So keep the good questions coming. That's it, man. Sending love to all you guys out there, wherever you happen to be, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Peace. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.